1969, President Nixon arrived to spend his first month-long working vacation at San Clemente. For Richard and Pat Nixon, San Clemente was the realization of a lifelong dream. It was a place of pride and power. Today, the gate at San Clemente was closed. It will swing open tomorrow for the return of Richard Nixon, private citizen. Since the excitement of the first year, townfolk have taken their famous neighbor pretty much for granted. Today it was business as usual in downtown San Clemente. But the troubles of Richard Nixon were on everybody's mind.
I feel like he let the country down.
You think there'll be a change now?
Oh, I certainly hope so.
Think it'll be a change for the better?
Well, it couldn't get any worse.
There's a lot of people that thinks that the president is really kind of getting the shaft, so to speak.
This is a very Nixon community here, and they've always backed him all the way along, and I just feel that since he's done his duty and he's done a good job, that he should retire and be perfectly content as a citizen again.
What impact do you think the resignation will have on this community where he's been living?
And I don't think it'll have any effect. It didn't have much effect on the community when he came, and I think that it'll have very little when he leaves.
We used to put the banners out, you know, each time he came, welcome Nixon, but we haven't done that for about 3 years, I guess.
Now the San Clemente estate becomes nothing more than the Nixon family's private home, and this town loses its status as an international dateline, an alternate capital of one of the world's superpowers. Saul Halpert, KNBC News, San Clemente.
Somebody asked Sam Yorty what he thought of this whole thing today, and he said he still believes the Watergate mess was blown out of proportion and that this country is going to miss President Nixon and his administration. Yorty cautioned the American people not to forget that the president did end the war in Vietnam. He brought detente between East and West and helped end the war in the Middle East. Yorty went on to predict that after a short honeymoon, the Democratic majorities in the Congress will try to pull down the new administration of Gerald Ford. And former California Congressman Jerry Voorhees, the man that Richard Nixon beat in 1946 to begin his political career, said in Claremont today that he is relieved that Mr. Nixon is no longer going to be the president. Voorhees said, and I'm quoting him here, "I think that at last the moral sense of the nation and the Congress is caught up with what has been going on in the most immoral and corrupt government this country has ever seen." Those the words of Jerry Voorhees. When the president does come home to San Clemente tomorrow, he'll be coming back to his native state, to a home not far from where he was born. Full circle, then, for a career that spanned the heights and the depths of human experience. Bill Windsor visited some landmarks of Mr. Nixon's earlier years today and now tells that story.
It began here for the man who was to become the 37th President of the United States. The modest frame home, the birthplace of Richard Nixon, now a tourist attraction which attracts fewer people than it did when the stone markers were put in, attesting to the city's pride in Richard Nixon. Little is known of his early days. He did begin his education here, not in the new Richard Nixon School, but in a much smaller one. His mother once said he was a serious boy even then. The Nixons moved to Whittier, opening a gas station and store when Richard was about 9. After reading about the Teapot Dome scandal, he was about 12, he told his mother he would like to become a lawyer, an honest lawyer who couldn't be bought by crooks. He spent 4 years at Whittier College, majoring in history, excelling in debate, and playing football. He never got his letter, but his teammates said he never quit trying. One person who knew him in college describes him as bright, hardworking, and dedicated to success. He was the student body president, finished second in his graduating class, and won a scholarship to Duke University. After he received his law degree, he hung out his first shingle in La Habra. His old office, now home for the Chamber of Commerce, has been marked as a state historical landmark, but not officially designated yet. As a naval officer during World War II, he picked up the reputation as being the best poker player in the South Pacific. That training could have helped him later as he moved up through the political ranks, and despite some setbacks and some hard feelings, move up he did. In the best Horatio Alger traditions, the youngster from those humble beginnings in Yorba Linda became the most powerful and, for a time, one of the most respected men in the world. Bill Windsor, KNBC News, Whittier.
I want you all to know that this is a terrible story, and I don't like it any more than you do. Now back to NBC News in New York, and we shall commence once again from here at 11 o'clock tonight. Thank you.
Special week. News correspondent.
Announce.
John Shanklin.
I'm Johnny Carson will not be seen this evening, so that we may bring you the following NBC News special program. Here is NBC correspondent John Chancellor.
And we're back again with more of the events of this historic and tragic evening. People all over the country, ordinary voters and people in politics, are reacting to the...
11:30 here in Washington. The president, in a 16-minute speech, announced his resignation from office tonight after 2,000 and a few days in office. He is the first president ever to resign in office. The reaction has been rather low in key, but the newspaper which probably contributed most to revealing the Watergate affair, the Washington Post, came out with a headline that is not muted at all. Nixon resigns. I have no doubt that those words were up in print a long time before the president made his speech tonight. The newspaper also contains a huge section summarizing the Nixon years in the White House, and an editorial which may too well have been written before tonight and before the president made his speech, talking about his resignation. One of the more poignant stories to emerge tonight concerns some of the last official photographs taken of the president and his family at the White House. It seems that White House photographer Ollie Atkins burst in on the first family yesterday evening, just when they were about to have dinner. They were taken by surprise, he said, but they were delighted, and these are the photos. First, the whole family, reading from left to right, Edward and Tricia Nixon Cox, the president, Mrs. Nixon, daughter Julie, and her husband David Eisenhower. At one point, according to photographer Atkins, daughter Julie was overcome with sobs, and the president took her in his arms to console her, as you see in this photograph. And here, a somewhat happier picture of the president and his daughter Tricia. These are the last still photographs we've had from the White House in the last 24 hours of the president's stay in the White House, though he still has 11 and a half hours as president before Gerald Ford becomes president. Harry?
Howard, I was interested in that headline on the Washington Post, and not meaning to be irreverent, but if you spend your lifetime in journalism and a lot of it in the print media, you are always interested in the size of type that they use. That's the biggest type I've ever seen in the Washington Post, and it takes you back to the biggest type the New York Times ever used, which was Men Walk on Moon. And I suspect the same thing was true at the Post tonight. They actually do not have type that big. There is no such thing. So what they do is they set it in the biggest type they have, and then they take a photograph of it and enlarge it and make a cast of that. It used to be known, that kind of type used to be known irreverently in the profession of journalism as second coming type, for obvious reasons, and they save it for events of that nature.
On headlines in the television world, I understand that there were 130 million people watching the president's speech tonight, which is said to be the second biggest television audience ever. The previous one was when the first man walked on the moon, and then they say 125 million people watched.
Well, I don't know of anyone who wasn't watching, and we didn't have tonight, or at least so far as I know, we didn't have any substantial complaint at the cancellation of regular programming, which you have had at times of equally or maybe even more somber occasions in the past. Some people always would rather see the regular programs. The attention now and tomorrow turns, of course, to Gerald Ford, who appeared tonight to seemingly calmly accept his responsibilities. For the 8 months that he's been vice president, Gerald Ford has earned a reputation as almost an acrobat. He had to walk a political tightrope, pulled in one direction toward Richard Nixon, a man whom he called a great personal friend and an outstanding president, but pulling Ford in another direction were the Republican Party regulars, anxious to make Ford the savior of the Republicans' Watergate troubles if he could keep an arm's length from the president facing impeachment. ABC's Stephen Gear assesses how he did it.
It was once traditional for the president to throw out the first baseball on opening day. That honor fell to Vice President Ford in Cincinnati, Ohio on April 4th, the day Hank Aaron hit the home run that tied Babe Ruth's record. Aaron and Ford may have something in common. For more than 20 years, both have been outstandingly successful in their public careers, yet neither gained much public recognition. Now, for both men, all that has changed. Ford himself has changed from those early days of his vice presidency when he swore allegiance to Mr. Nixon. He often expressed confidence back then that the president would be cleared of any personal involvement in Watergate. By the same token, few expected Ford to become personally involved in the president's defense.
The polls are bad enough, but a few extreme partisans seem determined to make the situation worse. They seem bent on stretching out the ordeal of Watergate for their own purposes, whatever they may be. While the American Farm Bureau Federation...
The speech was a disappointment to those who felt Ford was letting himself be dragged into the Watergate affair.
A coalition of groups like the AFL-CIO, the Americans for Democratic Action, and other powerful pressure groups or organizations is waging a massive propaganda campaign against the President of the United States.
Ford later conceded that the controversial speech had been drafted by Nixon aides. Even in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Jerry Ford is a hometown hero, the local newspapers said he had been sandbagged by the White House. The editorial urged him to put some distance between himself and the president on Watergate. Ford began to back off. A few days later, he told newsmen, "I'm running my own show." He started by hiring his own speechwriters. In late January, the White House was inviting key Republicans to read secret Watergate papers it claimed would exonerate the president.
The President has volunteered to show it to me. Well, that was part of our discussion yesterday, and I haven't had time to see it. I understand that Senator Scott had asked to see it some time ago, I don't know how long ago, and he was shown the information.
Ford wisely avoided the pitfall into which Scott later fell. The Senate Republican leader was unable to back up his defense of the president because the White House would not make the evidence public. In his early months in office, Ford crisscrossed the country, talking to Republicans on the grassroots level.
Vice President of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
While Ford invariably got a warm reception, he was surprised to find it difficult to generate the same enthusiasm for Mr. Nixon. What jolted Ford most was a special election back home to fill the House seat he had held for a generation. That election was won by a Democrat for the first time in 64 years. A Republican poll attributed the upset to Watergate and Mr. Nixon. To halt what he called a Democratic stampede, Ford campaigned in the next special election in Ohio. But the Democrats won that House seat too, their third straight victory in Republican strongholds. Watergate was an albatross around the party's neck, and pressure was increasing for the president's resignation. Like other Republicans, Ford began to establish his own separate political identity. More and more, he spoke of himself as his own man.
I'm my own man. I think my observations and comments in many areas indicate that where I have differences with the president, and I do, I've indicated my opposition publicly.
This growing independence was expressed most dramatically in a speech before the Midwest Republican Conference.
I ask this question in all sincerity: what lessons can we learn from Watergate? I think it would be most improper for us to speculate on the criminal and legal aspects of this sorry episode in recent political history. But I think it's fair that we can draw certain obvious political conclusions from that tragedy. The political lesson of Watergate is simply this: never again must Americans allow an arrogant elite guard of political adolescents like creep to bypass the regular Republican Party organization.
While it was Ford's intent to exorcise Watergate from Republican politics, his denunciation of the committee to re-elect the president was also a reflection upon the man who had set it up, Richard Nixon. After a few more tough speeches on Watergate, Ford was called in by the president for a private chat. After that, the speeches weren't quite the same.
I have read the transcripts. I have talked to many who are probably more authoritative on all of the evidence than myself. And I am convinced that President Nixon knew nothing of the planned break-in or the execution of it at the Democratic National Headquarters. And I'm personally... And it's my judgment that the evidence is overwhelming that he had nothing to do with the so-called cover-up. So the president, in my judgment, is innocent and will be exonerated.
Ford maintained a show of loyalty even on the night the House Judiciary Committee voted to impeach the president for obstruction of justice.
Mr. Vice President, it's cliche, I know, but you are a heartbeat away from the presidency. Do you feel any closer to the presidency tonight?
No, I still have the faith that I've had before, that the president is innocent of any impeachable offense, and I will continue to do the best job I can as vice president, because that is the position I think I will hold until January 1977.
A little more than a week later, Ford, always accessible to newsmen, was declining comment on impeachment or resignation. The president had released tapes showing he had been less than frank with the American people and with Gerald Ford.
It was just this week that Vice President Ford said that he thought it no longer served the public interest for him to reiterate his previously expressed positions in defense of the president. And then tonight, only about 15 minutes after President Nixon announced he would resign and that Gerald Ford would become president, he came out in front of his suburban home to talk.
Let me say without any hesitation or reservation that the policy that has achieved peace and built the blocks for future peace will be continued as far as I'm concerned as President of the United States. We've been fortunate in the last 5 years to have a very great man in Henry Kissinger who has helped to build the blocks of peace under President Nixon. I think those policies should be continued. And those policies of peace will be continued. I have asked Henry Kissinger, as Secretary of State, to stay on and to be the Secretary of State under the new administration. I've known Henry Kissinger for a great many years. I knew him before he came with the Nixon administration. I want him to be my Secretary of State, and I'm glad to announce that he will be the Secretary of State, which means that he and I will be working together in the pursuit of peace in the future as we have achieved it in the past. We have many other problems. We have problems at home which must be resolved. And they can be resolved and will be resolved by the cooperation of the Congress with the President and those that work with him. I've been very fortunate in my lifetime in public office to have a good many adversaries in the political arena, in the Congress. But I don't think I have a single enemy in the Congress. And the net result is that I think tomorrow I can start out working with Democrats and with Republicans in the House as well as in the Senate to work on the problems, serious ones, which we have at home. And the spirit of cooperation which I believe will be exhibited with the Congress and the new President on the
Take the pledge. Switch to Ralph's.
We pledge to serve the individual needs of your neighborhood.
Take the pledge. Switch to Ralph's, the supermarket.
If you just start looking up, you'll find more good things here in this country than anywhere else, including the best drink. Right now, isn't that a pleasant thought?
Look up, America, see what we've got. Red in the sunny side of living. Look for the best, yeah, live life refreshed. Look for the real thing. That's of the dollar. It's the real thing.
Tomorrow at 3:30 on Channel 7, Doris Day and Richard Widmark get lost in the tunnel of love. It's the 3:30 movie. See it on Channel 7 KABC TV, Los Angeles.
Three hours ago, President Richard Nixon made his 37th speech to the American people from the Oval Office of the White House. The substance of it was known in advance. It was known that he was going to announce his resignation, the first president in the history of the United States to do so while in office. And yet when the actual announcement came, when the words came, there was a tremendous, tremendous impact. As Mr. Nixon said, what he was known to say.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with problems we face at home and abroad. To continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
In spite of more than 2 decades in the glare of public life, Richard Nixon has managed to remain a private person, seldom allowing a glimpse of the inner man. But it is possible to perceive in his public statements flashes of the personality of the man within the president. ABC News correspondent Herb Kaplow takes us now through a session of Nixon talking about Nixon.
Even after Watergate had so compromised his presidency and himself, Richard Nixon maintained he was not beleaguered. He prided himself on his strength, on an ability to tough out the crisis. He'd faced other crises, he told us, and Watergate was a challenge as much as a burden.
And I suppose because I've been through so much, that may be one of the reasons that when I have to face an international crisis, I have what it takes. President. And, Mr. Torres, I have a quality which I guess I must have inherited it from my Midwestern mother and father, which is that the tougher it gets, the cooler I get. the captain's job to bring that ship into port. And I can assure you that you don't need to worry about my getting seasick or jumping ship. I'm going to stay on that helm till we bring it into port.
There was one startling display when the president lost his composure in public. In New Orleans, Press Secretary Ron Ziegler being shoved by the president and being ordered to keep newsmen from following too closely. That was in August of 1973, a time when the president was laboring to regain public confidence, public trust. Let others wallow in Watergate, he said. We're going to do our job. And devotion to hard work has been a persistent Nixon theme. Here is Richard Nixon on the work ethic.
Any suggestion that this president's ever going to slow down while he's president, or is ever going to leave this office until he continues to do the job and finishes the job he was elected to do, anyone who suggests that, that's just plain poppycock. We're going to stay on this job till we get the job done. I have no intention whatever of walking away from the job I was elected to do. As long as I am physically able, I'm going to continue to work 16 to 18 hours a day for the cause of a real peace abroad and for the cause of prosperity without inflation and without war. And I can assure you that no matter what some of my good-intentioned friends and certainly, I would say, honest opponents may suggest to the contrary, I'm not going to walk away till I get that job done. When I was elected to that office, I knew that I was elected for the purpose of doing a job and doing it as well as I possibly can. And I want you to know that I have no intention whatever of ever walking away from the job that the people elected me to do for the people of the United States.
The virtues of hard work have been echoed in the rare public statements of the Nixon women. Pat Nixon calling for Watergate to be put behind us so the president could continue with the more pressing national business. Despite the desires to get on with the running of the country, the issue of ultimate responsibility for Watergate would not disappear. The president's public statement suggested he was willing to take the responsibility, but more as a matter of omission than commission. Preoccupation with other pressing matters kept him from the tight rein he now felt he should have held on overzealous aides.
The easiest course would be for me to blame those to whom I delegated the responsibility to run the campaign. But that would be a cowardly thing to do. I will not place the blame on subordinates, on people whose zeal exceeded their judgment, and who may have done wrong in a cause they deeply believe to be right. In any organization, the man at the top must bear the responsibility. That responsibility, therefore, belongs here, in this office. I accept it.
But personal blame, to what degree of personal blame do you accept for the climate in the White House and at the re-election committee for the abuses of Watergate?
I accept it all. People around me didn't bring things to me that they probably should have, because I was frankly just too busy trying to do the nation's business to run the politics. And on that, I say, if mistakes are made, however, I'm not blaming the people down below. The man at the top's got to take the heat for all of it.
The heat Mr. Nixon was taking from the media was scorching enough to cause him to place some blame of his own. After months of silence on Watergate, the president held a news conference in the late summer of 1973. It was tough to govern, he said, while under a constant barrage each night on the network news programs. This theme of unfair criticism reverberated in later and more frequent presidential appearances.
There are a great number of people in this country that didn't accept the mandate of 1972. After all, I know that most of the members of the press corps were not enthusiastic, and I understand that, about either my election in 68 or 72. That's not unusual. Frankly, if I had always followed what the press predicted or the polls predicted, I would have never been elected president. But for 4 months,
to have the President of the United States, by innuendo, by leak, by, frankly, leers and sneers of commentators, which is their perfect right, attacked in every way without having some of that confidence being worn away. It isn't pleasant, for example, to hear or read that $1 million in campaign funds went into my San Clemente property, and even after we have a complete audit, to have it repeated. Those are things which, of course, do tend to get under the skin of the man who holds this office. I have never heard or seen such outrageous, vicious, distorted reporting in 27 years of public life. I'm not blaming anybody for that. Perhaps what happened is that what we did brought it about, and therefore the media decided that they would have to take that particular line. But when people are pounded night after night with that kind of frantic, hysterical reporting, it naturally shakes their confidence. And yet, don't get the impression that you arouse my anger. You see, one can only be angry with those he respects.
Whatever his complaints, whatever his standing in the public opinion polls, the president publicly maintained he was not worried. He spoke, though, of the danger of being obsessed with the past, and for his part, he said he was confident the verdict of history would be in his favor.
Do I consider resigning? The answer is no, I shall not resign. I have 3.5 years to go, or almost 3.5 years, and I'm going to use every day of those 3.5 years trying to get the people of the United States to recognize that whatever mistakes we have made, that in the long run, this administration, by making this world safer for their children, and this administration, by making their lives better at home for themselves and their children, deserves high marks rather than low marks.
Late in 1973, a major effort to convey the image of candor. The president's own income tax reports were made public. He took on the issue as to whether he'd profited financially while in the White House. And the nation had an extraordinary view of a president commenting on his own integrity.
I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Nixon on Nixon, an introspective look at a private man driven from what one writer called a cocoon of staff protection into taking his case to the people virtually alone.
We'll have more on the man who tonight said that tomorrow he will resign for the first time that a president of the United States has ever resigned. We'll have more on this historic night after this brief message.
There you go again, rubbing your eyes. What's bothering him this time? Pollution? Dust? Smoke? Glare? Pollen? Or just plain old tired eyes? Don't rub. Instead, treat your irritated red eyes to Visine with tetrahydrozoline to get the red out fast. You'll see it soothe. You'll feel it freshen. When you feel like rubbing, your eyes feel like Visine.
When you're hungry and thirsty, remember your two oldest friends. At the Wiener Schnitzel, every hot dog is a different taste experience. Tangy, cheese-flavory, savory, super delicious. And now, when you buy a 35-cent Coke, you get to keep the glass. A great offer from Der Wiener Schnitzel.
There's always more than you bargain for. Two guys, naturally.
Double exposures can't happen with this great GAF 220 pocket camera. Complete kit, now just $15.77. You save over $9. Go modern with a Permaneer open shelf bookcase, desk unit, wall unit, or record cabinet. Your choice now just $19.88 through Sunday.
There's always more than you bargained for. Two guys, naturally.
We at Ralph's know what your shopping problems are. Shortages, inflation. So we make a firm price pledge. We pledge to maintain low prices every day in your neighborhood Ralph's. We pledge to offer a vast selection of quality food products. Our stores on the average stock over 15,000 items. We pledge to serve the individual needs of your neighborhood. If you're concerned about your shopping costs, take the pledge. Switch to Ralph's, the supermarket.
We just showed you some film, lots of film, about President Nixon under pressure in the past year of Watergate problems. Whatever the pressures the presidency that battered Richard Nixon, he could always be confident that he had the support of a very supportive family in a time of crisis. Pat, the long-suffering wife, was even at his side, from Checkers TV appearance of the 50s to the triumphant tours of China and Russia 20 years later. And as they grew to womanhood, the Nixon daughters began playing a greater role in the president's public life, as we see in this profile by Virginia Sherwood.
Julie and Tricia Nixon came of political age, campaigning for their father in his 1968 race against Hubert Humphrey. On the morning after Election Day, the triumphant candidate told his supporters how Julie's faith had never wavered. During grueling days on the campaign trail, Julie had been working secretly on a victory gift for her father, never doubting that it would be appropriate. Now, President-elect Nixon could hold aloft a needlepoint replica of the presidential seal. It was only one of the many rewards of having a pair of articulate and photogenic daughters. The nation had a rare close-up look at the older of the Nixon girls during Tricia's storybook wedding in the Rose Garden of the White House. Tricia customarily shunned the political spotlight, but when her father was fighting for his political life, she spoke out loyally in his behalf.
My father has done nothing impeachable. He has done nothing wrong, and I think that, as you all will agree, you have to have done something wrong to be impeached. He has these great goals: peace in the world and creating a more harmonious atmosphere between nations of the world. If this is really what he's concentrating on, and I really think that he's going to go down as a very patriotic, great person who tried to do the best he could for the country and the world and brought a more peaceful climate to the world. I'm so proud of him. Are you from Columbus?
Sure are.
Oh, yes.
No less proud is Julie Nixon Eisenhower, 2 years younger than Tricia, but a good deal more at home in the political arena. Julie appeared to enjoy pressing the flesh in her father's campaigns, and when Watergate burst, she didn't flinch at the deluge of questions.
Watergate! What about Watergate?
Events have proven that my father was as much in the dark on Watergate as anyone until March 21st. So if anyone erred in that matter, it was because they were totally in the dark. I don't think it was a Machiavellian reason. Speaking from a personal sense, this is a difficult time for me, and I'm sure it's difficult for my father because he feels that he can't comment publicly on Watergate more than what he's already said, and that is that he was not involved, did not plan the bugging, and was not aware of the cover-up. My father is voluntarily surrendering the tapes. He is appointing a special prosecutor. He is not now, nor has he ever tried to hide anything.
The point that I make now is that we are proceeding as best we know how to get all those guilty brought to justice in Watergate. But now we must move on from Watergate to the business of the people. And the business of the people is continuing with initiatives.
Styles were different, but the substance of Nixon's offense seemed well coordinated with Julie's defense.
Just a moment. We've had 30 minutes of this press conference. I have yet to have, for example, one question on the business of the people.
The people are interested in Watergate. They want to know the truth. They want to know the facts. They want to know the story. But they are concerned that as much attention be given to the energy crisis, be given to inflation, be given to strategic arms talks, all these vitally important issues.
Julie created an issue of her own with a chance remark to reporters that the president had thought about resigning.
My father was playing devil's advocate. The idea of resignation was something that came into his mind because he was exploring, in his mind, he loves his country, and he was exploring every way to solve the Watergate thing, and to how to solve it in the best way. And he thought if by withdrawing himself, he could make everything in government move ahead and nothing, not all the attention be drawn to Watergate and not to the Brezhnev summit that was coming up and this kind of thing, that he would be willing to step aside.
White House spokesman tried to sidestep those resignation remarks, but Julie did her best to enlighten the press.
There was never a denial of the discussion. What Jerry Warren said was that my father had never discussed resigning with his staff. This was a family discussion. It was not ever something my father ever seriously considered, and consequently, it never went beyond the family in one discussion. And I think that the White House had to make it clear that this had never been discussed within the staff, because for months they had been telling the press corps that my father had not discussed resigning. And they had to make that very clear because, as you know, the press corps feels that there's a credibility gap between what the administration says and what actually happened. I hope that makes it clear.
What was perfectly clear was the loyalty of the Nixon girls. And for a beleaguered president, no small comfort in knowing that he could always count on the unwavering faith of his daughters.
In May of this year, Julie was angered by what she called the media obsession with her father's resignation, told reporters in the Rose Garden at the White House that her father would take his case down to the wire and would continue to fight if even there was only one senator who supported him. Well, of course, he changed his mind tonight and didn't wait to find out whether there was one or one-third of the senators who would support him. We told you about Ron Ziegler's last press conference a short time ago. Ziegler gave that final briefing to reporters in the White House briefing room. Here now is the tape of that event.
Well, I don't have a great deal of additional information at this time to provide you, but I did think that it would be important tonight to tell you about tomorrow's schedule and also to give you a brief recap regarding the President's activities today. Tomorrow morning, President Nixon will bid farewell to members of the Cabinet and the White House staff. That will take place in the East Room at 9:30 a.m. Joining President Nixon and Mrs. Nixon at that time to say farewell to the Cabinet and the staff will be Julie and David and Tricia and Ed Cox. Following President Nixon's remarks to the staff and the Cabinet, the President and the family will depart the South Grounds by helicopter for Andrews Air Force Base, and they will fly from there to their home in San Clemente. The President and Mrs. Nixon will depart the South Grounds at about 10 o'clock in the morning. There will be press coverage, if you would like, of the remarks to the Cabinet and staff tomorrow and of the departure. The President's letter notifying the Secretary of State of his resignation, effective at noon tomorrow, as the President announced tonight, will be delivered to Dr. Kissinger's office here at the White House by noon tomorrow. As I said earlier today, this has been a difficult day, and these have been difficult times. I would offer only a personal observation that the strength of the President during this period and the strength that I believe and the courage that he showed tonight, I think has sustained the members of the staff who have served the President over the last 5.5 years and over the last years and months. All I know have respect for the President and the cause for which he has represented through the period of his presidency. The President, for those of you who have asked, what his activities have been today. We've tried to announce those throughout the day, but to recap those for you at this time, he was up early this morning and spent time alone in the residence in the Lincoln sitting room before coming to the Oval Office this morning, where he met with Al Haig to discuss the business that remained at hand. The President, as you know, also met with Vice President Ford for over an hour this morning. That meeting began at 11 o'clock and lasted for over an hour. This afternoon, the President met with members of his personal staff and then spent most of the afternoon working on the address which he delivered to the American people tonight. Shortly before 7 this evening, the President, as you know, left the Executive Office building and wanted to walk to the residence privately, and he did that. After spending some time in the residence, he met with the leadership of the Congress. The first meeting was held at 7:30, and then the final meeting with the members of Congress was held at 8 o'clock tonight, both meetings in the Cabinet room. Mr. Warren has provided to the press the names of those leaders who attended the meetings. Following the speech tonight, the President left the Oval Office and walked together with Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State Kissinger, to the residence. Tricia and Ed and Julie and David and Mrs. Nixon watched the President's address tonight on television from the residence, or I should say in the residence. I believe that's the general rundown on the President's schedule today. I really don't think that at this time that I can answer probably the many questions that you might have. But Mr. Warren will be available, and we will provide answers to your questions, of course, regarding the additional items on the President's schedule as they may develop tomorrow. And we'll provide any additional information to you as the evening and morning unfolds. But I'd just like to take a minute myself to say goodbye. I hope over the next few weeks to have a chance to see each of you personally. But this is the last time we will be meeting in these circumstances. We've met, of course, in these circumstances, or in this setting, I should say, many times here and around the world. I've been proud to be President Nixon's press secretary over the past 5.5 years. I've tried to be professional, as all of you are professional, and I hope I've never underestimated the difficulty of your jobs or the energy and intelligence you bring to them. We've been through many difficult times together, and we've been through many historic times together. And I know that I'll remember the good ones, and I hope you will too. And I'd like to just conclude by saying that whatever our differences have been, I believe that there are no simple answers to the complex questions that this period poses. But above all, I think I take away from this job a deep sense of respect for the diversity and strength of our country's freedom of expression and for our free press. Mr. Warren will be providing to you later this evening any additional announcements that we have. And at 12 noon tomorrow, a new man will take this place. And I might say that it's been an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, Brian, can you tell us when the President made his decision? Well, does he know that?
Ron Ziegler in the last few months has lost a great deal of weight. He's taken up motorcycling. In Nixon's last year in office, Ziegler rose from being just press secretary to being one of the president's two topmost White House aides, Al Haig being the other. In the cabinet, the president was lucky to have in this time of trouble three very able men in the three topmost cabinet jobs, Kissinger in State, Schlesinger in Defense, and Simon in the Treasury. Gerald Ford, who now needs 11 and a half hours before he becomes president, made his first formal appointment tonight, naming Gerald Terhorst, Washington bureau chief for the Detroit News, to be his White House press secretary. Terhorst said that Ford asked him today to accept the job on a transitional basis, but indicated the appointment would be permanent if he wants to stay in the job. Terhorst said that Paul Miltich, who has served as spokesman for Ford over the last several years, will stay on as part of the White House staff. So President-to-be Ford has now made his first appointment after saying he would keep Kissinger's in state. ABC News will be back with more coverage of President Nixon following station identification.
This is ABC.
If you're looking for a beer that's born wet and clear, born in the land of sky blue waters, then reach for a Hamm's, reach for a Hamm's, Hamm's, the beer you've been looking for. Hamm's is the beer you've been looking for. Hamm's, the beer you've been looking for.
I will.
I will, but Jim won't.
Yes, I will have a second cup of coffee.
Jim never wanted a second cup of coffee at home. I always thought he just didn't like coffee a lot. But that night I realized he just didn't like my coffee a lot. So now I use U-Ban.
U-Ban blends some of the world's richest beans, like sun-ripened Colombians, for a deep, deliciously rich cup of coffee.
Yes, I will.
You will what?
I'll have a second cup of your coffee.
U-Ban, with richness worth a second cup.
Channel 7 KABC-TV, Los Angeles.
The job that Gerald Ford really wanted in life, had a strong ambition for, was to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. So in a sense, he failed. He only made president. Well, the man who did make Speaker, House Speaker Carl Albert, was one of a group of 5 congressional leaders who President Nixon met with this evening about an hour before he announced his resignation. Later, Albert talked to reporters about that meeting and about his reaction to the president's speech tonight.
I really think he came off well. And I think he did in his speech. Maybe it's partly the emotion of the time. Because some of my colleagues had predicted to me today that he would lambast the Congress, and he didn't. He told us down there that the president needed to work full-time, so did the Congress, and he hastened to say that if there was an impeachment, it would tie the Senate up from 2 to 4 months. So his whole attitude as he left was one of gratitude for his friends and understanding for those who had not agreed with him.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's a fair question to ask you, if the president left by helping to unite the nation, what you Democrats in Congress intend to do in the way of pledging support to our new president, Mr. Ford.
Well, I think that's one of the most important things that the president said tonight. He told us that this was a killer of a job. Well, President Johnson told me the same thing once, and President Kennedy said something almost the same. It's a full-time job, and it has enormous traumatic experiences that go with it, and that anyone who had any way of understanding what any person who occupied the job had to go through would want to cooperate with him, and I think that's particularly true of the Congress. We all know Jerry Ford. Everybody but the 5 or 6 new members that we have has served in the House with Jerry Ford, and some of us have served a long time. I was here 2 years before he was. So I've served with him every day that he ever served in the Congress. I like him. And I look upon his job as one of tremendous challenge. I hope I can make it easier for him, and I hope the country can make it easier for him.
Carl Albert, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Democratic congressman from a town that used to be called Bug Tussle, Oklahoma. But in view of their famous son, they decided to change their name to something I think more dignified, but I've forgotten what it is. Bug Tussle, I remember. Harry?
Well, Boston, Massachusetts is not as interesting a name as Bug Tussle, Oklahoma, but we've got a report from Boston showing how the citizens there reacted to this evening's historic events. And we'll now go and hear that.
The crowd in Slades on Tremont Street watched the president's final announcement quietly, pensively, almost unemotionally. Some seemed to be saddened, but as they later expressed, not for Mr. Nixon, but for the consequences of his 5.5 years in office.
I just personally think it's a sad day for this entire country. And they allow a man to get to a position like this where it caused such a shame all over the world.
It has made it sort of a very hard thing to express with children, because you talk with your children about being, you know, your integrity, about your, you know, honesty and things like that. And then when your president itself does not live up to those standards, it sort of makes a very hard viewpoint for a mother to discuss with their kids as to how they should grow up and how they should conduct themselves.
For something like this to happen at this point, it's difficult for us to even absolve this, and I think that most of the people, and myself in particular, don't really realize the importance and the shock that this has caused our country and our people, black and white.
In downtown Boston, where a good part of the history of this country began, the streets seemed especially quiet. Few people loitered, no horns blared. And yet, within one city restaurant at least, Betty's Rolls-Royce in Government Center, there was food and music, but barely a hint of anticipation of what was perhaps to be the most historic moment of our lifetime.
This is the 37th time.
The people watched and listened, most of them intently, some half-heartedly, others not at all. There were jeers, a few tears, and applause at the announcement of resignation. And when it was over, sighs of relief, feelings of remorse, wishes, hope, and even indifference.
Very disappointed in him, really. He just reiterated the things that I thought he's been caught on right along, and I just thought he'd go out in a little grander style and just say, hey, I played my cards and I lost.
We heard these same sincere expressions 2 years ago, and he's just shown us again what a persuasive liar he is.
Well, I feel we've waited for this moment for a long time, and it's finally come.
We feel a little sad. I think it's finally proven that the Constitution does work, and we're all Americans, and I think he acted like an American this evening, and now let's all go back to work and get the country back on its keel.
I feel the man didn't have any other alternative. He was forced into this situation. Unjustly.
I really felt bad for the man. I know what we have, but I do not know what we're going to get.
As you just heard, reaction was mixed, and tomorrow some people will ask for mercy while others will shout for due process and punishment. But beyond the opinions, it is hard to imagine any American tonight without at least a twinge of pain. It is our country, it is our Constitution, and it was our leader who fell. I'm Natalie Jacobson.
People of Boston in Massachusetts, which was the only state in 1972 which voted against Richard Nixon. We go a long way now, and we have a report from ABC's Ken Keshawahara, who spent this evening in Whittier, California, President Nixon's hometown, and watched the president's resignation speech with two of the president's oldest friends.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office.
Clint Harris is probably Richard Nixon's best friend in Whittier, California, the president's hometown. He was a classmate of Nixon's in college and has maintained close ties with him ever since. And tonight, as he and his wife watched the speech, both reacted as friends of Richard Nixon, the man.
I think the speech left me with great sorrow and also great pride. I agreed with him more than 100%. when he said he was no quitter, because I've known him so long and knew that he never was a quitter in tough times. But as he says, he felt that it was good for the nation, and I feel that he sincerely felt that, and it certainly is true that the nation's been without leadership either from him or the Congress or Senate for quite some time, and it's important to get it into good leadership. I take him at his word as to why he resigned, that he was doing it for the good of our nation, and I respect him for it. If I could have my desires, it would have been for him to have continued through the Senate and, of course, won. But it doesn't look like that was one game that could have been won as we see it right now.
Richard Nixon and Clint Harris played football for Whittier College 40 years ago. The coach then was Wallace Newman, number 53. He, too, has remained a close Nixon friend, and on this historic day was angry.
This man has gotten himself involved in the politics of the nation, and they've roughed him up plenty, and when they've roughed him up, they've roughed some of the rest of us up, because we believe in the man.
You sound somewhat bitter, are you?
I am bitter. I think we've done a dirty trick to a man, to a good man. Certainly, here's a good family man. Is one of the nicest families that have been in that White House in years, 50 years. And he's coming out of it with a lot of people thinking that he's a stinker. And the family record, I think, is, well, I'll put it against any of them. Any of the presidents clear back to Coolidge's time.
Ken Kashiwahara, ABC News, Whittier, California.
Richard Nixon's old football coach, one of what must be a substantial number of people, no matter what the president's popularity has shrunk to, a substantial number of people who feel extremely sad and somehow deprived at tonight's events. Now, 3.5 hours ago, and 3 hours and 3 hours and 40 minutes ago, when President Nixon announced that he would become the first American president to resign. That the friends of Richard Nixon, the people who in public life retained great loyalty to him, were not all that many on a personal basis. He was a private man. He didn't speak that freely to that many people. We saw one of the men who had been with him a long time earlier tonight, Herb Klein, who was his communications secretary. Now Dick Shoemaker and Robert Finch.
Positive and strong, and reflected his sense of the office and his sense of the presidency and his sense of 28 years of, I think, remarkable service as a public official. I think he set the stage well for Jerry Ford.
You've known Mr. Nixon for many years as both a friend and a political advisor. How is it possible that he finds himself in this position?
Well, I don't think we can make instant judgments tonight, and I've been away from the White House for 2 years, but I think that this unprecedented transfer of power